Hi students, welcome to yet another session of my class. Today we are going to discuss a new poem, Train Journey by Judith Wright. Let us discuss in detail. What do you know about Judith Wright? Yes, Judith Wright, she was born on 1915 and died on 2000. That means her life period was from 1915 to 2000. She was a passionate poet, a zealous environmentalist, and a strong advocate of Aboriginal land rights. That was her fame. She was a passionate poet, then a zealous environmentalist. Zealous in the sense that is full of enthusiasm, vigor, energy, etc. That means a powerful environmentalist and a strong advocate of, yes, that is a strong supporter of Aboriginal land rights. What do you mean by this Aboriginal land rights? Aboriginal in the sense existing in a country from its earliest times. Aboriginal people, that is primitive people, are existing as indigenous people. That is the term meaning of Aboriginal, that is existing in that country from the, yes, from its earliest times onwards. Such type of people are called Aboriginal people. So he was a strong supporter or advocate of, she was a strong supporter or advocate of Aboriginal land rights. That means she was a passionate poet, then a zealous environmentalist, and a strong advocate of Aboriginal land rights. Here, Aboriginal people in the sense indigenous Australians are the Aboriginal here, because she was an Australian poet. This Judith Wright was an Australian poet. Then, she was born in Armidale, New South Wales, Australia, and she realized very early in her life that poetry was her first love. Yes, even in her early ages, she realized that yes, she realized very early in her life that poetry was her first love. That means that much she loved writing. And she joined Sydney University in 1934 to study philosophy, history, psychology and English. That means she studied so many subjects and took up different jobs. Yes, and she took up different jobs, but she left all these jobs soon and settled as a full-time writer and a social activist, because first of all she was a enthusiastic or a passionate environmentalist, zealous environmentalist. That means she was very much loving nature. And the second point is, yes, from even in her early lifetime, that is even in her early years of her life, that she realized that her first love was poetry. That means she was fond of, or she was very much attached to main two things. One is the love for nature and the second one is love for poetry. And next is one of the first Australian environmentalists. Yes, this Judith Wright was considered as one of the first Australian environmentalists. This Judith Wright was always in the forefront of the struggle for the preservation and conservation of nature and wildlife. Yes, she was always fighting. She was always fighting for the, yes, preservation and conservation of nature. She was always in the forefront of the struggle for the preservation and the conservation of nature and wildlife. That's why, yes, in the first sentence itself, we considered Judith Wright as a zealous environmentalist. That means she was that much attached to nature. Then she was one of the founding members of the Wildlife Preservation Society of Queensland. That means she was considered as one of the Yes, early Australian environmentalist, and she was one of the founding members of one organization named Wildlife Preservation Society of Queensland. Then she has been called the conscience of the nation for her passionate commitment to protect Australia's environment and its Aboriginal people. She has been called conscience. Normally, conscience, the word means one's moral spirit or moral guiding spirit, etc. That is moral conscience, one's conscience. She has been called the conscience of the nation, that is often called. Why? Because of her passionate commitment to protect Australia's environment. Yes, uh, she was always fighting for the preservation of Australia's environment, try to protect Australia's environment and its Aboriginal people, that Australia's indigenous people or the primitive people. Then her poems, that is, Judith Wright has many collections of poetry and prose writings to her credit. Yes, she wrote a number of poetry and prose. That is, many collections of poetry and prose writings to her credit. And she was also a recipient of many honors and awards. She got so many honors and awards for her writings, for her contribution to environmental doings, etc. Her poems are marked by her intense love for the Australian landscape and her focus on the interaction between land and language. Her poems, most of her poems are marked by her intense. That means in most of her poems, she expressed her love towards her own native country or the Australian, her love for the Australian, especially for the Australian landscape, and her focus on the interaction between land and language. She tried to establish a relationship between land and language, and her life's mission was to use words and poetic forms to act as a bridge between human experience and natural world. She used her language to establish a relationship between man and human beings and nature. That is her life's mission. She believed that her life's mission was to use words with the help of these words and languages and poetic devices or poetic forms to act. Yes, with the help of these language, she tried to establish a bridge, to act as a bridge between human experience and the natural world, man and nature. And she firmly believed that it was her duty as a poet to interfere in issues which would upset the balance between the two. She believed that it is her duty as a poet, as an environmentalist. She believed that it is her duty to involve into the issues that, yes, disrupt the balance between man and nature, that disrupt the balance between human world and natural world. So, yes, she wrought continuously for the protection of Australian landscape as well as try to maintain an equilibrium or a balance between man and nature in her writings. Yes, what makes her a great poet and an even greater human being is her interest not just in nature but in the larger design of man as part of nature. Yes, what makes her a great poet? It is because of her greater interest towards nature as well as relationship between, yes, try to establish or bridge a relationship between man and nature. Her interest not just in nature but in the larger design of man as part of, that is her belief, man is a part of nature. Her writings are widely read and appreciated by poetry lovers and environmentalists because the messages that she seeks to convey through them are relevant not just to Australia but to the world at large. Yes, that the message she is trying to convey to the readers through her writings, That is, her writings are widely read and appreciated by poetry lovers and environmentalists because there is one reason behind this universal approval, because the messages that she seeks to convey through them are, yes, the messages she tried to convey through her writings are relevant, not limited to Australia, not relevant or not just to or not limited to Australia, but to the whole world, but to the world at large. Her poetry, her writings that picturizes the whole world, try to establish the relationship between man and nature universally. That is the relevance of her writings. That's why her writings got universal appeal. Then regarding our poem Train Journey is regarded as one of her best poems. And in this poem, she perceives the landscape, mainly Australian landscape. She perceives the landscape as seen from a train or as visualized in a dream, and refers to it as the force that developed her sensibilities. Yes, she perceived or she, yes, visualized that landscape. She perceives the landscape, Australian landscape, as seen from a train journey, or as visualized in a half dream, and refers to it as the driving force that developed her sensibility. She believed that it is the influence of that nature or that landscape or the driving force behind her sensibilities, and she makes clear use of literary devices like personification and apostrophe to add a sense of life and power to her visualization of the landscape. She used so many literary devices here in this poem, like personification, that means attributing qualities to animate, or then apostrophe, direct addressal to the inanimate or objects, and like personification and apostrophe to add a sense of life and power to her visualization of the landscape. The metaphysical representation of the landscape is conveyed in the romanticized poem Train Journey. And when she talks, yes, of the small trees is something that is in detail that we are going to discuss in the next class, that is regarding the poem. What is the message she is trying to convey with the help of this particular poem, and what is she picturizes in this particular poem. All the details that we will discuss in the next class. That is the gist of this poem. It is a one of her best poems, and this poem is about her vision or her dream, or she perceives the landscape as seen from a train, and she believed that it is a force that developed her sensibilities, and she used so many literary devices like personification and apostrophe, etc. She believed that, yes, it is with the help of these literary devices she tried to establish a relationship, or she tried to add a sense of life and power to her visualization of the landscape. And more details we will discuss in the next class. I think all of you understand this session, and there is a homework for you students, and the homework is write a note on Judith Wright. Write your homework properly and send back to me. Thank you. Have a nice day. See you again.